Generational curses are easiest to break because every demon will bow in the name of Jesus. But patterns, God has to empower you to create a new rhythm.
At 39, Pastor Lovy Elias finally confirms the heartbreaking news that left his entire church in shock. What was supposed to be a normal Sunday service inside Revelation Church quickly turned into a moment no one saw coming. The atmosphere felt different, heavy, almost unexplainable from the very start. But what really happened when he stepped forward wasn't just a sermon. It was a confession that would reveal a painful truth the church had never expected to hear. The silent Sunday that felt different. Something about that Sunday inside Revelation Church immediately felt off. It wasn't the usual energy people had grown used to. Normally, the room would already be alive before the service even began. Voices blending together, worship rising, people smiling, greeting one another like family. But this time, everything felt subdued. Even the air seemed heavier, like everyone was unconsciously waiting for something they couldn't explain. The lights were dimmer than usual, casting a softer glow across the sanctuary. The music playing in the background wasn't loud or celebratory either. It was slow, almost reflective, the kind that makes people pause without realizing why. And instead of excitement, there was a strange, quiet tension sitting in every corner of the room. People still came expecting a powerful message. That was normal for Sundays at Revelation Church. They expected inspiration, encouragement, maybe even another moment of prophetic fire from their pastor. But as they settled into their seats, a subtle shift began to spread through the congregation. Whispers replaced laughter. Glances replaced conversations. It felt like everyone could sense it at the same time. Something wasn't right. And then he appeared. When Pastor Lovy Elias walked toward the front, the entire atmosphere changed again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. He wasn't moving with his usual confidence. The same man who often stood tall with a strong voice and steady presence now looked different. His steps were slower. His expression carried weight. And even from a distance, people could tell that something behind his eyes had broken through the surface. The room fell into complete silence. No one needed to be told to quiet down. It just happened naturally. As if the congregation instinctively understood that whatever was about to unfold, it required respect, attention, and stillness. Pastor Lovy stopped at the front, not immediately speaking. He looked out at the crowd, and for a moment, it seemed like he was trying to gather strength just to stand there. His hands were still, but his chest rose and fell, like he was holding back something heavy. People began to notice it more clearly now. This wasn't the same pastor they were used to seeing every Sunday. And then, before a single word left his mouth, tears began to form in his eyes. That alone was enough to shift everything. A few people in the front rows leaned forward, unsure of what they were seeing. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. Even the worship team in the background stood frozen, unsure whether to continue or stop completely. The silence became deeper, almost unbearable. Because, in that moment, everyone realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary service. It wasn't just another Sunday message. Something real was about to be revealed. Something personal. Something heavy. Something that would change the way the entire church saw their leader. And just as Pastor Lovy finally opened his mouth to speak, trying to steady his voice through the emotion rising in his chest, no one in that room could have predicted that the words coming next would mark the beginning of a confession that would shake Revelation Church to its core. And what he was about to say next would change everything. When the pastor finally breaks down. When Pastor Lovy Elias finally spoke, his voice didn't come out the way people expected. It wasn't strong. It wasn't confident. It wasn't the voice of a man about to deliver a message. It was quiet, fragile, like someone carefully holding back something that had been building for a long time. He stood at the front of Revelation Church, staring at the congregation, but it felt like he wasn't really seeing them. It was as if his mind was somewhere else, somewhere heavier, somewhere painful. Then it happened. His voice cracked on the very first few words, and just like that, everything changed. Tears began to fall before he could even complete a full sentence. He tried to pause, tried to breathe, tried to steady himself, but the emotion had already taken over. The man who had always been the one comforting others was now the one unable to hold himself together in front of everyone. The room reacted instantly. A wave of shock moved across the congregation. Some people lowered their heads in prayer without even thinking. Others covered their mouths, whispering, "Lord," under their breath. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was concern, because no one had ever seen him like this. Behind him, his family sat quietly. His mother, in particular, could not hold back her tears. She pressed her hands together tightly, as if praying silently for strength, not just for him, but for herself as well. The weight of the moment wasn't only on the pulpit, it had spread across the entire room. Pastor Lovy tried again to speak. I need to be honest with you today," he said, pausing between words. But honesty, in that moment, came with pain. He lowered his head, wiping his face quickly, almost embarrassed by his own tears. But there was no shame in the room, only silence, only understanding. And then he said something that hit differently. Sometimes even those who stand strong for others need someone to stand for them. That sentence didn't just land. It settled into people's hearts. You could feel the shift immediately. This wasn't a sermon anymore. It wasn't a carefully prepared message. It was something raw, something real. A few people in the front rows began to cry openly now. Others simply sat still, frozen, as if afraid that moving might break the moment. Then Pastor Lovy finally admitted what no one expected to hear. "My family and I, we've been going through something we never prepared for." His voice trembled again as he spoke. He stopped mid-sentence, took a breath, and looked down, as if the weight of the words was too heavy to carry out loud. The church went completely silent again. People leaned in, holding on to every word, sensing that what was coming next would explain everything. The disappearance, the silence, the sudden distance he had shown in recent weeks. Because now it made sense. The missed live sessions, the absence from social media, the quiet withdrawal that followers had noticed but couldn't explain. It was all leading here. And as Pastor Lovy stood there, still fighting through tears, trying to gather the strength to continue his confession, everyone in that room could feel it. The truth was not fully revealed yet. It was only beginning to surface. And what he was about to share next would uncover the real reason behind his silence, and the heartbreaking battle his family had been facing behind closed doors. The pain behind closed doors. The moment Pastor Lovy Elias began to speak about what had been happening behind the scenes, the entire atmosphere inside Revelation Church shifted again, this time into something even heavier. It was no longer just emotion on the surface, it was the feeling of hearing something deeply personal unfold in real time, something that had been hidden away from public view until that very moment. He paused for a long time before continuing, as if searching for the strength to put the truth into words. "My family," he started, then stopped again. You could see it clearly now. This wasn't just difficult for him emotionally. It was something he had been carrying for weeks, maybe even longer. The kind of burden that doesn't show easily on the outside, but slowly weighs down everything within. When he finally continued, his voice was softer, almost trembling. "We've been walking through a season we never expected," he admitted. "Something we prayed would never come to our home." A quiet gasp moved through the congregation. People didn't interrupt. They didn't react loudly. They just listened, carefully, attentively, because every word felt like it mattered. Behind him, his mother bowed her head lower. Her hands remained tightly clasped, trembling slightly as she prayed under her breath. The pain wasn't just his anymore. It had become shared within the room. Pastor Lovy took another breath and continued. "There are things we don't always share with the world," he said. "Not because we are hiding, but because we are still trying to understand them ourselves." That honesty hit differently, because it revealed something people often forget about leaders. They are still human, still vulnerable, still affected by life in ways no position or calling can fully shield. Then he revealed the heart of it. "A close member of my family became seriously ill," he said slowly, choosing each word carefully. The room reacted instantly, but still quietly. A few people covered their mouths, others lowered their heads in prayer. Some simply froze, as if processing the weight of what they had just heard. This was not what anyone expected, not from him, not from a man known for speaking about healing, faith, and miracles. He continued, his voice breaking slightly. We prayed, we fasted, we believed with everything in us. A pause, but things didn't go the way we hoped. That sentence landed harder than anything else so far, because it introduced a reality many people struggle to accept. Faith does not always produce the outcome we expect, and hearing it from someone they trusted made it even more painful, yet strangely more real. A few tears began to fall openly in the congregation now. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of emotion, full of shared understanding, full of quiet prayers rising from different corners of the room. Pastor Lovy looked down, wiping his face again. We kept asking God to change it, he said softly. We kept waiting for a miracle. His voice cracked again. But sometimes the answer doesn't come the way we imagined. That moment marked a turning point in the service. It was no longer just about his family's struggle. It had become something deeper, something every person in the room could relate to in their own way, because everyone there had a prayer that hadn't been answered the way they wanted. And now that truth was sitting in the open. As he lifted his head slightly, still emotional, still trying to hold himself together, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The sadness remained, but something else was beginning to form underneath it: reflection. And just as Pastor Lovy prepared to continue, everyone could sense that what he was about to reveal next would not only explain the pain they had just heard, but also challenge everything they thought they understood about faith itself. Faith tested in real time, what began as a confession slowly turned into something even deeper. An unfolding moment where belief, pain, and truth all collided inside the same room. Pastor Lovy Elias stood at the front of Revelation Church, still visibly shaken. But something had changed in the atmosphere. It was no longer just sorrow filling the space. It was reflection. It was recognition. It was the kind of silence that forces people to look inward. He wiped his face again, took a slow breath, and continued. For years, he said softly, I stood here and preached about faith. He paused, letting the words settle. But this is the first time I've had to live it in a way I never expected. That sentence carried weight because it revealed the difference between speaking about faith and actually walking through it when everything is falling apart. In that moment, his message was no longer theoretical. It was personal, lived, and painfully real. The congregation remained still, locked in attention. No one was looking away now. Every word felt like it carried something important, something that couldn't be repeated or replaced. Pastor Lovy continued, his voice still unsteady. Faith is not pretending everything is okay, he said. Faith is trusting God, even when nothing makes sense. A few people nodded slowly, others whispered quiet prayers. It wasn't a reaction of excitement anymore. It was understanding. He began to describe what the past weeks had truly been like behind the scenes. Nights without sleep, moments of silence where prayer felt heavy instead of comforting. Sitting in hospital rooms where time moved slowly and hope felt uncertain. We prayed, he said again, more firmly this time. We believed. We held on to every word we had spoken before. His voice broke slightly. But every day, we were still waiting. A long pause followed, and nothing changed the way we wanted it to. The honesty in that statement made the room tighten emotionally. It wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about every person listening who had ever waited for something that didn't arrive. A woman in the front row began to cry softly. Someone behind her bowed their head. The weight of shared experience filled the space. Then Pastor Lovy said something that shifted the entire tone again. We didn't get the answer we prayed for, he admitted, but we discovered something else. He looked up slowly. We discovered strength we didn't know we had. That line landed differently. It wasn't about defeat, it was about endurance. Because sometimes, he implied, faith doesn't change the situation immediately. Sometimes it changes the people inside it. The atmosphere began to shift again, not away from pain, but through it. There was still sadness, but now there was something else forming beneath it. Acceptance, understanding, a quiet kind of peace that comes only after honesty is fully spoken. People weren't just listening anymore, they were connecting their own stories to his. And as Pastor Lovy stood there, still vulnerable, still open, still speaking through emotion, it became clear that this moment was no longer just about personal struggle. It was becoming a shared revelation. And just as he prepared to continue, the next truth waiting to be spoken would push the entire room even further, into a moment where brokenness would no longer just be witnessed, but transformed into something far more powerful. When brokenness became healing. By the time Pastor Lovy Elias reached the final part of his message, something had already changed inside Revelation Church. It was no longer just a service. It wasn't just a confession being shared from the pulpit. It had become something far more intimate, an exchange of pain, faith, and understanding between one man and an entire congregation. The heaviness that once filled the room was still there, but it had transformed. It no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it felt shared, like everyone was carrying a piece of it together, and somehow that made it easier to bear. Pastor Lovy stood quietly for a moment, still emotional, still wiping away the last traces of tears. His voice, though fragile, had found a certain steadiness again. And then he said something that shifted everything one final time. "When you see someone cry," he said softly, "don't mistake it for weakness." He paused, its strength being released. The room responded differently now. There was no shock, no confusion, only agreement. Quiet nods, whispered amen. People holding on to those words like they had been waiting to hear them their entire lives. Because in that moment, the church wasn't looking at a broken leader anymore. They were looking at someone who had chosen honesty over image, truth over silence, and vulnerability over distance. He continued, his voice still emotional but clearer now. "We don't grow because everything is perfect," he said. "We grow because we learn how to stand, even when everything falls apart." A soft wave of emotion moved across the congregation again, but this time it wasn't overwhelming. It was grounding. It was calming. It was the kind of truth that settles instead of shakes. Then Pastor Lovy looked at the people directly. "I used to think miracles only looked like healing," he admitted, "but now I understand. Sometimes the miracle is simply being able to keep going." That statement lingered in the air. For many in the room, it felt like a personal reflection of their own lives, their own struggles, their own unanswered prayers. And as he spoke, something beautiful began to happen. People started reaching out to one another. A hand on a shoulder, a quiet prayer whispered beside a stranger. Tears no longer of sorrow alone, but of release. The atmosphere was no longer divided between pastor and congregation. It was unified. Then, for the first time in a while, Pastor Lovy smiled faintly through his tears. "My family didn't walk through this alone," he said, "because you were with us. Your prayers, your love, we felt it." A few people in the crowd began to cry harder at that. Others raised their hands in prayer. The entire room felt connected in a way that couldn't be manufactured or planned. It was simply real. And in that reality, something powerful settled over everyone present. Pain had not ended the story. It had rewritten it. Because what started as heartbreak had now become healing. What began as silence had become testimony. And what felt like breaking had become rebuilding. As Pastor Lovy stepped back slightly, still holding on to his mother's hand, the church responded with a wave of emotion that filled every corner of the room. Some were praying, some were crying, some were just standing still, absorbing everything they had witnessed. And in that moment, one truth became undeniable for everyone present: brokenness, when surrendered in honesty and faith, can become something truly amazing. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful moments like this. Share your thoughts below and stay tuned for the next video.